You're a brand new recruiting manager. You're 2 weeks in to your dream job. You get a call from your boss. She brings you into her office and begins to tell you about a brand new talent strategy that's going to be the focal point of the organization's strategy for the upcoming year. And your team is going to lead it. Sound familiar? You leave her office, you walk back to your desk, you sit down, and as you do, a cold wave of terror slowly washes over you. You see, there's a problem. You've never done this thing before, and you have absolutely no idea where to start. So what do? Maybe you've been able to build a diverse network, and you can phone a friend and tap into their experience and see how they've dealt with this in the past. Maybe you have access to subscription-based resources and tools that can inform and inspire your work. Maybe you don't. What then? What happens if there's another scenario where you have access to a resource, and this resource contains peer-reviewed case studies from fellow practitioners that have done that exact same thing? And not only talking about what they've done, but breaking down why they did it, how being the most important part, what they got wrong, and key takeaways for HR. Now, what if this resource also contained dozens of peer-reviewed resources, things like podcasts, websites, tools that can help educate and inspire your work? That's the vision behind open source HR. And that's what we're going to be spending the next 30 minutes sharing with you today. And to tell the story of open source HR, it really begins with the story of Hootsuite and how their culture and values allowed us to incubate this idea over the past 5 months. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce my good friend, Hootsuite's VP of Talent, Ambrosia Vertesi, to tell you a little bit more about that journey.
Thanks, Lars. Thank you. I am so excited to share this story with you guys. And as Lars said, it starts with a quick introduction on what Hootsuite is. I'm not going to get you to stand, although that was really amazing. Quick show of hands, how many people know what Hootsuite is? That's great. And for those of you who don't, high level, it's a social relationship platform that enables over 12 million users and organizations manage and optimize their social media from all different networks from one place. But I'm actually not here to talk to you about that today. I'm here to talk to you as a people practitioner, sharing my lens and the journey I've gone on that's helped bring us here today. So this is where my flight begins. To put things into perspective, I always wonder, what are you guys up against as people leaders? And this is what my world has looked like for the past 5 years. I started in 2011, right around that 20-person mark. I shared a desk with the founder, Ryan Holmes, and his dog, Mika. We were as bootstrapped, or as I say, duct taped, as you can possibly come. And ever since then, we've been spending the past 5 years building a global organization of 1,000 employees in 10 countries and hyper-growing. And in order to do this, what's been really unique about our experience is that social is in our DNA. And as we've built our organization and partnered with hundreds of other organizations, both at the SMB and enterprise level, this idea of social disrupting our workplace and disrupting how we communicate has lent a really interesting lens and a really interesting story to share to people about how are they going to manage in this new world and what's working for them. What's also helped us bring here today is our values. This idea of leading with humility and building a better way is imperative to the success of our organization. Really, if you ask me, to a lot of organizations. But for a talent team, I think what matters is I'm in an early adopter community who's hyper-growing in a space that's undefined around us. And so we want to not only hold people accountable to this growth, but we also want to provide the best use case example of HR living these values and helping our business grow. We want the street cred, to be honest with you. And in our culture, what's ingrained is this idea of building something bigger than yourself. Everybody at Hootsuite is fired up by this idea of building something bigger than ourselves. And we call it BSU. What is BSU? I get asked this a lot. It's a heck of a Twitter feed to read, I'm sure. And really, this isn't social jargon. This isn't an HR acronym. Simply put, for us, BSU means blowing shit up. Okay? And this is something that's really owned by our employees. It's not something that I brought out there. Early on in our growth, our leaders would walk around saying these huge things to motivate people, like, let's go build more internet, and let's just blow shit up. Our employees took this on as something that they defined themselves as, a hustling community, some people that were going to find that 37th wind. And in an organization for us, this was really huge that 80% of our cultural initiatives are driven by our employees and marked with this hashtag. This was not going away as we scaled. And so what do you do with something like this? For us, in talent, we owned it. This is our first open source and socially sourced thing that we did as an organization last year. And before I go any further on these, I just want to let you guys know, if I got my scheduling right, which I know is kind of tricky, all of the resources and the materials that we're going to share with you guys are being tweeted out as we speak and following the session as templates that you guys can take back to your organizations and apply right away. So this is 100% of a give. So I'm going to talk about them at a high level, but they're yours. And for us, one of the big things about this that I think is important is the appetite it built in our organization to share. And admittedly, BSU, if it goes without guiding principles, is a recipe for potential disaster. It can add to distraction. So we put in a framework really quickly to actually make it a driving force and a success driver for us. And the thing that I'll call out here that I think matters today, and you'll hear a lot about, is us talk about this idea of working out loud. And the principle of working out loud is simple. Constantly giving each other visibility into the bigger picture, whatever the big picture might look like. Maybe it's an initiative you're starting, maybe it's a social revolution with a capital R. Whatever it looks like, this set us up in a really great spot to build a natural gravitation towards this idea of open source.
And so as we began thinking about this idea of open source HR, we looked at other fields outside of HR to try to find out where innovation was happening. And we kept coming back to software, and more specifically, open source software. And if you're not familiar with open source software, it's a type of development where code is built under an open source license, allowing other developers to reuse that code. It's dramatically impacted the World Wide Web. Most of the web was built using open source technologies, and it's led to rapid changes in innovation. And so we thought, could this work in HR? And that got us thinking about how we're learning in HR today. And really, when you think about it, Google is our new classroom. This may be the very search string that talent acquisition manager is on when they got back to their desk, breaking out in a cold sweat, trying to figure out how to handle this new initiative that they were being given. But it's a lot more than Google. There's never been more information at our fingertips. It's getting increasingly difficult to parse through that and figure out what's meaningful. So how do we learn? We're all here at Talent Connect. We're going to be learning a ton over the next 3 days. Events are a great place to learn. But it's so much more than that. It's social media. It's blogs. It's podcasts. How many of you are here because you're interested in employer branding? A lot of hands. There's a monthly Twitter chat called EB Chat that takes place the first Thursday of every month, where hundreds of your fellow employer branding nerds, my fellow employer branding nerds, are getting together to share ideas and best practices and work to propel each other forward as a community. So then we started looking at this community piece and thinking about how this impacts learning. And this community approach isn't necessarily novel to open source HR. There's a great example of this that's existed for years, which are the True conferences, or I should say the True Unconferences, led by Bill Borman out of London. True is a global unconference series that brings together people that are curious about the field of talent acquisition. There's been over 250 events in over 40 countries all around the world. And this has been an accelerator of ideas. People come there. They come there with a shared interest in talent acquisition. There are very little rules, hence the unconference. No name tags, no badges, no decks, no pitches. Everybody's equal, everybody's expected to come and share, anybody can lead a track, and True is an incredible example of this open source ethos in HR. And so really, as we looked at all of these things together, they all really served as the cumulative inspiration for this idea of open source HR.
So I think what's really interesting is how do you get on this path? Where does it start? And for us, it actually started where I think probably most of you guys at some point have come across each other. It started with drinks, beers at South by Southwest, at a conference just like this, talking about what could we do if we put some things in place to build our collective genius as practitioners. And these pictures, two time-lapse differences in them. The one on the left is actually a shot that one of our employees captured of Lars and I's first conversation, our first Skype call 4 years ago. I said we were a duct tape company. Those carpet stains kind of speak to what our world looked like. We were limited on resources. I'm up there in Canada. I got to phone a friend network. I got to find a way to do this, okay? And Lars extended a hand, and for 90 minutes, all proprietary information aside, we opened up our playbooks to each other. We shared how are we going to get ahead of doing this. And as the years went by, as you can see, we got a little bit more serious about it as the years went on.
And just a quick side note on the photo to the left. This is actually the first, you're right, this is the first documented blue steel sandwich in the history of Talent Connect. So really, I want all of you to appreciate this moment. Remember where you were today when we had an opportunity to provide to you a blue steel sandwich. And thank you, LinkedIn, for this golden moment in Talent Connect history.
That's so upsetting. And so how do you not bring someone like Lars on your team to come and help you do something like this? It was such an exciting moment for us. We just needed to find the vehicle to do it. And one of the things that I spoke to earlier was this idea of having not only the opportunity to build our own business, but to help hundreds of other organizations try and figure out how to work in this new environment. And for us, what I've learned is that social organizations, or organizations, I should say, that want to be successful in this new social world, they have an idea or their own version of working out loud. It is imperative that you have some capacity of sharing, because if you don't, we all know there are things like Glassdoor, social media being one of them, but lots of ways that if you're not working out loud, the conversation's already happening. And so we use this as a driving mission on a lot of the things that we did. So when we started talking about this idea of HROS, HR open source, we're all busy, we're all practitioners, we've got a lot going on. But why? What is our why? Our Simon Sinek, start with a why. This was a page that we took out to decide that this is going to be what defines our success. And so we've talked about a couple, but ultimately, sparking innovation, accelerating the learning that's required to narrow the gap between the laggard and the leader community right now. Some people are holding this quite closely. I think it should be everywhere. I think it should be everyone's. So democratizing ideas, building open education, and of course, I'm a social lady. Use social to leverage the learning for everybody. And so what does that mean, ultimately? What does this boil down to? It's a great idea and philosophy, but in action for us, taking the methodologies of engineering and applying them to HR seems like a pretty good place to start. It's been working out for them for years. We'll see how far it takes us. Sharing best practices, learnings, and failures. I think we all see a lot of, look at this amazing thing I did. Look at this amazing thing I did. But sharing, and here's what didn't go right, and here's how you can avoid that pitfall. That vulnerability, to me, is a strength that will propel us all forward together, and something we want to enable. And case studies are an easy way to do that, and by case studies, they don't have to be extremely heavy lifting, but the idea of providing a safe place for people to have permission to try, to fail or succeed, and ultimately, to share. And
so I think when you think of the term open source HR, a lot of people immediately connect that with the word transparent. And if we're playing bingo, which some of we are, transparency. I'll get that out of the way early. You're probably going to hear that a lot over the next couple days. That's a buzzword du jour in recruiting. But the reality is, open source HR is actually not about transparency. We're not asking, nor are we, opening up our entire playbooks and letting all of our operations out on the table. What we are doing is picking particular projects and initiatives that we lead and sharing the why and the how that project comes together so other peers can find inspiration in that and use that to help inform their own strategy. And we do realize that this idea of openness is not right for every company necessarily. And I was reminded of that several weeks ago when I was talking to a good friend of mine, and he is a talent acquisition director at a major Silicon Valley tech company. And I sat down, I broke down what we're trying to do with open source HR. I said, "What do you think?" He said, "Lars, I think that's awesome." I said, "Thank you." But then he said, "If I do that, I'll be fired tomorrow." And he was right. The reality is not all companies are going to be ready. We live in this war for talent environment that's continually beaten into our head, that it's brutal war and competition over everybody. And in that mentality, there isn't room for this. But we're willing to bet that there's room for a different mentality, and that's really the driver behind creating open source HR. And so when you look at how open source HR is structured, there's really two main components. It's the case studies that we'll get into for a moment, but it's also social shares. And this is the easiest and frictionless way to get involved in open source HR. And the idea is, if you're reading an article, an infographic, a case study, a white paper that you find either educational or inspirational, tweet it using the hashtag HROS. And there's going to be a whole community of people who are following that hashtag to find that inspiration. And so those are really the two components that make up open source HR. And so what we want to do is actually spend a minute getting into the meat. Let's get into the case studies. Let's talk about some of the stuff that we built. And the first case study we released was a project particularly near and dear to my heart, which was the first project I was involved with at Hootsuite called Operation Follow the Sun. And the roots of Follow the Sun went back, again, to Beers at South by Southwest. We're talking about live streaming. Meerkat had just come out. And we were having a conversation around how cool would it be to use live streaming to showcase culture and employees and offices. And 2 weeks later, Twitter re-released Periscope. And we decided that we were going to use Periscope to do a campaign where we would actually start in our Singapore office and every hour on the hour literally follow the sun around the globe from Singapore to Bucharest to London to Boston to Sao Paulo, all the way through to Vancouver, showcasing our employees and our talent. And so we pitched this idea, and Ambrosia said, "Let me go away and talk to our CEO, Ryan Holmes, and marketing to get green light." And for those of you that do branding projects like this, you know that you're pretty much going to be waiting for weeks to months to get that green light, if it ever comes. Less than 24 hours, Ambrosia calls back and says, "We're a go. We're going to do this next week." And that was my first taste of blow shit up. And it was on. And we decided then that this case study was actually going to be, this project was going to be our first case study in open source HR. And that laid the groundwork for what the format of each case study was, which is what you did, why you did it, how, again, really being the meat, what the specific results and metrics were, what you got wrong, and key takeaways for HR. And that what you got wrong part was essential as we were building this. And there's a few reasons why. One of our values is leading with humility. And this was right for us to be able to say, look, we do make mistakes, and here's what some of them were. But bigger than that, we all go to conferences and events, and we see companies with big names that are doing really interesting work, and that's great. But if I'm a small company, a recruiting manager in Detroit, that doesn't feel that accessible to me. And particularly if I'm that person, and let's look at this project. This is a big Periscope social media campaign that Hootsuite executed. Well, of course Hootsuite can execute a project like this. You're Hootsuite. This is your space. And you know what? They're right. We certainly have advantages with a project like this. But the reality is we're still going to make mistakes. And if the idea behind these case studies is there to serve as a blueprint for education and inspiration, we feel that it's important to actually warn fellow practitioners, here's some things you need to look out for. here are some potential pitfalls you could fall into if you do this, so they don't make those same mistakes.
And so I'm probably sitting in the audience right now, if I were you, thinking what Lars said. Of course, so here, the social company did a social HR share. Not surprising, but that's my business. And that's how I got that 24-hour turnaround, was knowing the customer, knowing the product, and knowing that my internal stakeholders would care about this and add fuel to the fire. It's also what provided us the opportunity to keep this thing going. And so in order to make sure that it was accessible, knowing that not everybody's going to start with social media and that that was an early mover advantage, we went back to basics. And so our next share was really how to design a global recruiting dashboard, something the team had been working on for a while, and something we felt would be accessible to any industry, any size, whether or not you were iterating, building, or just taking a look to benchmark what you already had. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these particularly because, like I said, we're tweeting out all of these for you guys to download and take away, including the resources and the templates. So take those away, bring them into your business, punch holes through them, give us your feedback on what worked or what didn't. But what I will call out here is that this was a team initiative. And that idea of democratizing ideas, I don't know where he is, I can't see, but Derek Isley is in the audience, and this was actually his initiative. So it was not one guru getting this out here. He penned it, he shared it with you. I'm super proud. And so then we moved on to something that I think, if we're playing buzzword bingo, candidate experience is kind of everywhere right now, along with a few others. But candidate experience is central to our jobs. We all want to build brand ambassadors regardless of whether or not they get the job or not. And as much as we want to find people their dream job, we all have to be very honest about the fact that we are also in the rejection business. We are in the business where not everybody gets the job. And how we share that information with people, and from our job descriptions to our rejection email templates to our very basic communication with people, to the autoresponder, defines who we are as a business and our humanity. And for us, this was imperative that we shared what we learned from it and the results that we got out of it. And then when we went on to continue to build, we wanted to move outside of just looking at recruitment, which is kind of the easy place for us to start. At the time, Hootsuite had just become a BCorp certified organization. And along with talent, I oversee internal communications, obviously employer branding, and corporate social responsibility, which was an initiative we'd recently adopted from marketing. And we were trying to find a way to hold ourselves accountable to our shareholders, our stakeholders, and our community. And this was our journey to that. And what I think matters here for this group is the share on this is not only how do you actually fill out the forms and do the things, but really looking at how do you get internal buy-in. Sharing our how to not only all of you, but to our employees, helped us be set up for success with 40% of our organization, after we shared this, within 60 days, signing up with their free time to help make this work for us. That's a huge win. And finally, if you were to walk away with one thing today, if you were to go online and download one thing we shared, I really hope it's this. And the reason why is, we're obviously a lot of employer branding nerds in here. We felt like this one would pertain to you guys. But I think for us, this is more about just, this is so awesome, check it out. Or we spent a ton of money because we didn't. It was really a team effort. This was something that took a lot of sweat, a lot of time from our team to make sure that we felt that we could genuinely enable our recruiting team globally. So for those of you who are building or overseeing a global talent acquisition team, providing them a quick alignment, a toolkit for them to get localized content, competitive differentiators, and then add in social on top of that is pretty complex. It can take a lot. It can take a lot of training, and if you're moving as fast as we are, it ends up being a nice to do instead of a mission critical thing. So some of the stuff we ate our own dog food, we used our own tool to help enable getting buy-in and getting this going. That might be unique to us, and we share those learnings. But what's, I think, applicable to everybody in the crowd is the bread and butter of the template. And so I leave you with that to take away.
And so all these case studies are great, but the big question remains, does anyone care? So as we built these, we got to thinking, we felt these were really valuable shares with the industry, and we were proud of the work. But it wasn't until we started seeing the reaction to them that we really understood how this was resonating with the community. And to date, the case studies have been downloaded and viewed over 13,000 times. But more importantly, we've heard from dozens of practitioners who've reached out to us, thanking us, letting us know that this case study has been an instrumental building block in their own talent strategy. And that feedback galvanized us. It continued to push us forward and let us know that we were onto something. And so as open source HR continued to gain momentum, we knew we had to make one structural change. When we launched this, it was an effort that we incubated within Hootsuite. And the original hashtag was Hoot, HROS. As we started getting more interest from partner organizations, we knew we needed to tweak that. And so Hoot HROS became HROS. From there, we built hootsuite.com/HROS, and that's where you can find all of the Hootsuite case studies. And then just last week, we introduced the new hub for open source HR, HRS.co. HROS.co is where you will find every case study that exists. They're all tagged. They're organized by topic, so you can search them and easily find what you're looking for. It includes dozens of curated resources. And most importantly, it includes instructions on how you can get involved yourself directly with open source HR.
And I think, like Lars said, this has now become brand agnostic, and that was always the intention. The intention was always to move this into the community. It was incubated in Hootsuite, but it was always a share. And I feel grateful to be empowered to do that in my organization. And we went outside of the organization once we made it brand agnostic and saw, who's going to get involved in this? And Earl's, actually, Brenda Rigney, over there, I can hear, was the first company to step up. Huge company. And I think what matters about this is two things to me. One, it's not a tech company. And this is a very, very real criticism of a lot of initiatives. Oh, well, you're in tech. Of course you can do that. You're in tech. This isn't tech. But second, she's actually talking about this very thing in a session right after this. So if you want to deep dive into what this is all about, she's up right after us. The one thing I will call out on this that I think matters to everybody is reduced hiring costs by $1 million. $1 million. I don't even have that kind of budget, but the thought of that alone is enough for me to spend 30 seconds reading and downloading this material. Second of all, CA Technologies, Craig Fisher from that blue steel sandwich that will forever haunt me, has stepped up to share what it looks like at scale. 100,000 global applications and a solution to fix the black hole. The sharing on here is concrete examples of large-scale solutions being shared openly. And they were able to trim down their response time by 3.5 days. And 3.5 days is forever in this real-time environment we live in. And finally, Oracle recently stepped up and shared with us how they leverage free tools like Google Forms for candidate pipelining and engagement. And I think this is amazing because we all kind of walk around with this idea that large organizations have these big budgets, and if only I had this big budget. But we all have creative constraints. We all have this to do this. And this is a really great share for anybody in any size of the organization. Now, I'm going to take a moment to just kind of recap. I've covered a lot of case studies. But just to kind of wrap it up here, we have shared 8 case studies from 4 organizations in a matter of 5 months when this movement started. That is huge, and we're just getting started on the momentum.
And so the question that we leave you with today is, are you ready to open your kimono? And we understand that a question like that may have you feeling a little bit like this. Look, we get it. We're all recruiters. We've been in this space forever. We know that there's this notion of the war for talent, and we have to be hyper-competitive, and there's no room for collaboration. There's no room for sharing. We're calling BS on that. The war for talent is dead. Talent won. Let's move on, okay? But you may be feeling other things when you see this. You may be saying, sweet, I just got several new templates that I can take back to my boss and say, look at the amazing ROI of me attending Talent Connect. And by the way, do that, and immediately follow up with, that's why I need to go back next year to keep this learning going. So please, bring these back. Be like, look at all the cool stuff I got. But what we really hope is that you leave inspired. Inspired to think a little differently. Inspired to work against that war for talent mentality and realize what we can do together as an industry if we do open up a bit to each other, share a bit more, collaborate more. What we hope you leave is inspired to join open source HR. And there's a variety of ways for you to do that. If you're tweeting using the HROS hashtag, congratulations, you're joining open source HR. If you work for a company that believes in this and is willing to open up just a bit of your playbook to share some of your best practices, we encourage you to go to hros.co and sign up to become a member organization. And as this initiative grows, there's going to be room for more. There will be volunteers in a variety of different capacities that will help manage and grow this initiative. This is an initiative that's been around for 5 months. There's been 8 case studies contributed by 4 companies. There's been thousands of tweets generated. There's been dozens of resources curated. We're just getting started, and we hope you'll join the journey. And thank you for allowing us to come here today and share the story of open source HR.